evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming to this evening's exhibit opening and presentation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jarrett, and I'm the curator here at the Amelia Island Museum of History. Now, before we dive in, I'd like to ask everyone to please turn off or silence their cell phones so we can avoid any interruptions while our speakers present it. Now, before I turn it over to our speaker, I have a few quick announcements about upcoming programs and events happening at the museum. Now, you all may know today is the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month. The museum will be celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month with the Fiesta de Santa Maria on September 30th. Come on out to the farmers market on the 30th for a day of food, music, and celebration of our local Hispanic community. Next month's Brown Bag Lunch will be presented by Jean Dixon Mann, local genealogist and founder of the Amelia Island chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She'll be marking the final weeks of Hispanic Heritage Month by talking about one of Fernandina's oldest Spanish families, the Fernandezes, and the story of how their descendants shaped both Fernandina and Florida. Now, a few members of the Fernandez family have actually joined us in the room tonight. If you look hanging on the wall behind the bar there. If you would like to learn more, make sure to come out to our Brown Bag Lunch on October 4th. Next month's Third on Third speaker will be Perry Francis, the great-granddaughter of American Beach's founder, Abraham Lincoln Lewis. Miss Francis will be telling us the story of Anna Kingsley, a former enslaved woman who went out to manage her own plantation with her husband on nearby Fort George Island. The Kingsley Plantation is now part of the National Park Service, and if you'd like to hear more about this unique story, join us here on October 30th. On the Saturday before that, or October 20th for the Third on Third, sorry about that. On the Saturday before that, October 14th, the museum will be holding the Gravesite Chronicles event. This event gives guests a chance to tour Bosque Bellows Cemetery in town and hear the stories of those buried there, with costume interpreters standing next to those people's final resting places. Now, if you will all indulge me, I would just like to say a few words about the exhibit opening tonight. This exhibit, Fernandina in Fiction, was the first exhibit that I had the chance to work on since arriving here 2 months ago. And in all earnestness, I was a little intimidated by tackling this subject. There are so many potential titles to read and watch, and I really wanted to make sure I had a broad scope of what made Fernandina Fiction so special. But now that we're at the opening and the exhibit's complete, I have to say I wouldn't have chosen any other introduction to Fernandina. The stories we tell about ourselves, our history, and the culture that surrounds us defines who we are as a community. And the community that comes jumping off the page in every single work set in Fernandina is so well-defined, so proud, and so creative. So thank you all for trusting me to tell this part of Fernandina's story. Now, finally, I do have the honor of introducing our speaker for this evening. Joe Palmer is a local author and a longtime Fernandina resident. The subject of his talk tonight, or part of the subject of his talk tonight, A Mariner's Tale, established him as one of the most exciting voices in the rising tide of local authors telling both Fernandina and Southern fiction stories. Joe has been a guest speaker at the Pat Conroy Literary Festival in Beaufort, South Carolina, and has years of experience as a local writer for the Florida Times-Union. So, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Joe Palmer.
Thank you, Jarrett, for having me as a guest. And I don't see him here, but I'd like to also thank Mark Kaufman for referring me to you. I saw him in the store the other day and made a point of going over and making sure that I told him about that. So, I'm Joe Palmer. As he's already told you, I can be somebody else in about 2 seconds. I'll start out by telling you, if you're so inclined as to throw tomatoes at me, throw heirloom tomatoes, not just grocery store crap. I really like good tomatoes. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the book. I'm not going to go on and on and on and on about it and give spoilers. I know some people. How many people here have read it? Okay. So the people who haven't read it, I'm not. If you want to read it, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but I'll give a couple of little hints here and there, but nothing really bad. We're also going to be talking a little bit about Southern literature as a genre, and about what inspires Southern writers to write, particularly regional, local stuff like like Jarrett was just talking about, the beauty of our surroundings. So what I'm going to be talking mostly about is place as both character and muse in writing. And I'll start out with a quote by Pat Conroy. I'm sure probably some of you here have read The Prince of Tides. My wound is geography. It's also my refuge and my port of call. My wound is geography. That's my wound. That's probably every Southern writer out there's wound is geography. We're wedded to the place. We can't get away from it, either in our heads or in our writing. So what do? We just write about it. We write about what's important to us. Southern fiction is very wrapped up in a value system. The Southern Renaissance that started in the early 1920s. It was the first step away from Southern literature as a rear-facing thing of the antebellum South and the lost cause and all that stuff. The tide turned in the early 20s, and along come authors like William Faulkner and Thomas Wolfe, Erskine Caldwell. There was an African-American gentleman by the name of Charles Chestnut. Charles wasn't quite in the Renaissance, he was a little bit before it, but this is all the World War. Catherine Ann Porter's another one. These were all people that started this movement. Southern fiction is a genre unto itself. You don't have quote-unquote Midwest fiction or quote-unquote New England fiction. Now you do have Westerns, but that's a cat of a different color. That's not another kind of genre fiction. But Southern fiction is a story in and of itself. It defines a region and the people who live in that region. It got its start, as most literary scholars are now starting to say. It began with the influx into this country in the 19th century from the Celtic people. They came here and brought 6,000 years of storytelling with them. And along with that, of course, you have the African American experience, the former enslaved people. And they had a big storytelling tradition also. And it was, once again, it was built around this value system. It was built around the land. The land is all, the Celtic people, that's all they had was land. They didn't have anything else. They had land, and if they had land, they were happy. And of course, the Native American experience. Once again, we had storytellers for thousands of years from the Native Americans. This part of the world, primarily the Creek, Seminole, and Cherokee tribes. So what happened was, as time went on, it became this ball of wax that just sort of got rolled and melded and became this specific genre of Southern fiction. After this first wave, the second wave of authors who came along, World War II, post-World War II, now we're talking about Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty, Zora Neale Hurston, James Dickey, those folk. They took it to the next level. They started the whole thing, all of a sudden, the early Southern fiction authors became very critical of the Southern experience. They looked back on the slavery issue and the gentry issue is not such a good thing. And all of a sudden they were not afraid to talk about that. They weren't afraid to talk about broken families and mental illness and things that have been sort of swept under the carpet in the past. When I was growing up, the mental hospital in Georgia, Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, nobody in polite company said the word Milledgeville out loud. It was Milledgeville. And you told your kids if they weren't well behaved, you'd send them to Milledgeville. But along comes this group of writers who, and all of a sudden they're unabashedly talking about this stuff. There's an old saying that we put our crazy people on the front porch. We don't put them in attics. We hand them a drink and stick them out on the veranda. And then, of course, now the modern era, of course he's dead now, but the late great Pat Conroy. I think Pat probably put the icing on the cake. He's my favorite author, and certainly my favorite Southern author. He's had a profound influence on me as an author. And I've been honored to be affiliated with the Pat Conroy Literary Center in Beaufort, South Carolina, since its beginnings 7 years ago. If you get a chance, if you want to go someplace really nice, go to the Pat Conroy Literary Center. It's a museum. You'll see a lot of his stuff there, his writing desk, his chair, but also the books and the letters and the mementos and things. He's buried in a very plain, almost unmarked grave in a little cemetery out in a place called Penn Center. It's an African-American church, and that's where Mr. Conroy wanted to be buried. He wanted to be with the people that he wrote about. He wanted to be buried in that little cemetery, and had to get permission from the elders of the church to be buried there. They'd never had a white person buried in their cemetery before, and so it was a big deal to them. But they graciously opened their arms, and he's buried in this very simple grave. You would expect you go someplace and find this big monument like the famous person he was, but no, he was a simple man of simple taste. So what got me started on this is I'm a sailor. We got any sailors here? People who have sailboats? There you go, Scott. I know you. My wife and I lucked into, I'll say lucked into loosely, a 1969 Cal 28 that was in really bad shape. And we wanted a bigger sailboat, and we couldn't afford a bigger sailboat, so we found this thing that Bill Cavanaugh was just giving away. And, well, let me take that back. Bill doesn't give anything away. We paid him a few bucks for it. I'll put it that way. Not much, but a few bucks for it. And we set about restoring it. We were self-taught sailors. We had a little Catalina 22 swing keel that we taught ourselves to sail. We did everything wrong. We made all kinds of mistakes. We ran aground all the time. But we taught ourselves how to sail by hook and by crook. And so then we lucked into this beauty of an old antique sailboat, and we set about restoring it. And I met this guy, and the protagonist in this story, a guy named Jack Merkel, who owns this marina. He's an old sailor. He's a retired merchant marine. He had a shrimper. He took his pension when he retired and bought a shrimp boat, and he spent the rest of his life as a shrimper. Now he owns this boatyard and marina, and he's building his own sailboat that he started building with his wife and his son 10 years earlier. And of course, that's a tragic story. But along comes this kid and vandalizes this boat. I was working on my boat down at the marina one day, and I was introduced to this man named Gene Hartman. And Gene Hartman sort of became my model for Jack Merkel, the protagonist in the story, the old sailor who takes this wayward kid in to teach him a better way. Gene could do anything. I've never seen a man so talented, except maybe my brother. Gene could fiberglass a boat. He could pull your diesel engine apart blindfolded and put it back together, and it would run better than it did. He knew all about woodworking. He knew about machinery. He could pull a rudder off that was busted and make it true again. I just never saw anything this guy couldn't do. And of course, when you have a sailboat, you always have to work on it. 6 months after buying a new sailboat, you're going to have some problems. So Gene was telling me how to work on this sailboat, and we were talking about fiberglass. He said, don't ever try to lay up fiberglass in the middle of the day in the summer. You're just going to lose your religion. You're not going to get what you're trying to do fixed. Fiberglass isn't going to set right. So here I was out there one afternoon trying to patch a hole in the bulkhead of the sailboat. It was about 104 degrees outside, and I wanted to get it done. I got to get it done now. I have no patience whatsoever. So I got to get this hole patched, and every time I tried to do, the glass cooked off too fast and it was just a mess. And I finally sat down and I was drinking a bottle of Gatorade and I was listening to this song. Who's familiar with Mark Knopfler? Mark was the front man for Dire Straits. Mark is a singer-songwriter, and his song lyrics are just poetry. They read like stories. And so I was listening to this song by Knopfler called In the Sky, and it's about this old sailor who built his own sailboat and sailed all over the world. And I just fell in love with this song on the spot. And as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking to myself, there's a novel in this song. This song's got a novel in it. I mean, all you got to do is chip away the notes around it, and there's a novel sitting there. And I went home that evening and told my wife, I'm going to write a novel. And it's going to be about blah, blah, blah. And the original title of this book was Vagabond Wind. And that's what I was going to call the story based on a line in that particular song that I was listening to. So I went and sat down at my desk and started writing. Now, I'll back up just a little bit. I've been writing since I was a kid. My creative writing teacher in high school was very encouraging. She and I are still friends. She just recently retired as a professor at a community college up in Georgia. She invited me up 2 years ago to talk to her classes. Boy, what an experience that was. I thought I was going to walk into a classroom full of just sort of sleepy, bored-looking kids, and I got peppered. I mean, it was great. So anyway, I decided I was going to write this particular story. I went to my desk and I sat down and I started writing it. I had no idea when I started writing this story where I was going to go with it. I had an idea in mind. I said, I know who the characters are a little bit, and I just started putting it together, and the characters would just sort of wander into the scene. You know, I got this guy coming in from this way, and I got another guy coming in from this way, and I got a female character who the story wouldn't have been the same without Margie Waller. And Margie was supposed to be, she was just going to be a pass-through character from one chapter to the next. And she had such a strong presence that she just grabbed me by the shirt collar and goes, I'm going to be in this story and I want a really good part. And I'm not leaving. And so I wrote Margie into this story, and she has a lot of agency, and she is the yin to Jack Merkel's brooding yang. She's the perfect counterbalance for him. So as I'm writing this story, I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go. I liken writing to sailing. And Scott, you know, if I want to get from here to where that fire extinguisher is in the corner on a sailboat, let's say it's 10 miles away, what are the chances that we're going to sit a dead heading on that fire extinguisher and go straight to it?
Never happens.
Never going to happen. You're going to tack port, you're going to tack starboard, you might have to jibe, you may have to go 25 miles offshore to get your wind and come back this way. The wind does not come at you in a flat force like that, which I always thought it did. No, it comes at you in fingers. And so you got to figure all this stuff out. Well, that's what writing is like. It's like sailing. You know, now there's some authors out there who are very linear. They start at point A and go all the way somehow. They make it all the way to point Z without deviating their course. I can't do that. And most Southern authors don't write that way. That's the other thing is the Southern authors, the ones, I'm not necessarily talking about genre fiction like suspense and thrillers and that kind of stuff. John Grisham writes great stories, but he's not a quote unquote Southern fiction author. He does suspense type stuff that's just off the wall. However, his first book, A Time to Kill, I think was his best book. My understanding was he was selling that book out of the trunk of his car at one point before anybody knew who he. And I got this from Pat Conroy's wife, Cassandra. She said, "Oh, I met him in a parking lot one time. He was selling books." So, I don't know if Grisham would agree with that or not. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So anyway, that's the way it goes. I mean, we take these things that are beautiful that resonate with us. And I'm a very tactile writer. I want to bring the reader into the story. I don't want you just sitting back there reading it, which is fine. I do want you to read it. But I want you to live it. If you pick up this book and read it, I want you to live this story. And I feel confident enough to tell you, if you do read this story, you will live this story because it's very tactile. I touch all five senses. I write with the five senses. And the beauty of this island is what inspired me. You know, in addition to Knopfler's song, it was largely the beauty of this island. I've been fascinated with this place since I was a little kid. I'm not a native of here. I grew up in this little hole in the wall up in South Georgia called Waycross. You may have passed through there. I don't know. I ran away when I was 18 and joined the Navy to get out of there. But this was a place where we came to play. This was the place where we all aspired to be, was right here. And so I've always found this place just to be so beautiful. I mean, I don't want to, be too fond of talking about the old times because the old times are gone. But this place was especially beautiful back in, as I recall, in the 50s and the 60s when it was wild nature. It was just wild nature. There was nothing but sand dunes and woods and some houses and a downtown shrimp facility, a fleet of shrimp boats that went almost from the paper mill on one side, almost to the port on the other side, and 4 boats deep. I mean, that was the shrimping industry. I mean, it's gone now, but it was beautiful. And so when I started writing this, I just got it in my mind, this is what I want. This is what I want in this story. I want this vivid green of this Spartina grass. That's one of the things that fascinates me. I could sit out there on a dock someplace and look at that beautiful green Spartina grass all day long and never get bored. And I like it the way the light plays tricks on it. It's green like crushed emeralds just sort of scattered all over the marshes out there. It's this bright emerald green, and all of a sudden the breeze comes along and it's avocado green. It's changed colors. Where a rain cloud passes over, now it's another color green. And now as we're going into early autumn, it's starting to turn the color of a wheat field. And so green to me, green is growth and renewal. It's also a symbol of hope. I remember growing up Catholic, we had to read the catechism, we had to memorize it. The 3 virtues, faith, hope, and charity, all had colors. Of course, charity being for the heart is red. Faith was yellow, but green was hope. And so the story is based on hope, growth, and renewal. But it's built around this natural beauty here. I mean, you got dolphins in it. You got manatees in this story. I mean, I sold my boat a couple of years ago. But I would sit on the dock working on the boat, and the manatees would come, and if you're quiet and don't scare them, they'll just come right up to you. I mean, after a while, now you got to be careful not to interfere with them or anything. But if they're not afraid of you, they'll just come around like your pet dog, and they'll hang around and they'll watch what you're doing. They're very inquisitive. And I would go down and work on my boat and just watch these manatees coming and playing. And I was sitting on the boat one day, doing some polish work on the side of it, and I had my feet in the water, and I felt something bump up against my feet. And it startled me at first, and then I looked down, and it was about a 10-foot manatee. It was a female, and she had a baby with her. And she came up to the dock, and she rubbed around and rubbed around. You know how cattle do? They'll get on your legs, and they'll go this way, and well, that's what this mama manatee did. She got up against my legs and just sort of went this way and that way, and then she rolled over on her back and exposed her tummy to me, which is a big deal. I mean, that's how an animal shows they're unafraid of you. They get on their back and show their belly. So this is the kind of stuff that inspires me to write, and this is what we have here. This is what we're blessed with. This is the kind of raw material that an author, and not just an author, poets, painters, musicians, people who work with clay and pottery. I mean, these are the building blocks. This is the raw material that we have to work here, that we have to work with here, that's our art. And I'm just captivated by it. And so I decided when I'm writing this story, I wanted it to be Fernandina specific. Now, it's not called Amelia Island in the book, it's called Morgan's Island. And I made a couple of, it's very local. You know, if you read it, you'll recognize some things. You'll recognize the county courthouse. You'll recognize probably the Marina restaurant, although it's not called that. You'll recognize some features. I even have Nana down in American Beach in the story, because I've just always been in love with that sand dune. I mean, there's something about it to me that's just magical. I mean, I remember when I was a little boy, I thought it was a mountain. I can remember going down to the south end with my dad to go fishing, and he and my uncles would be standing on the beach fishing, and I wanted to go play in the mountains. And that's what I thought. I thought Nana was a mountain, because you can go all the way up on the top of it. But I remember one of the most profound experiences in my whole life. I must have been about 15 or 16 years old, and some friends and I were camping out one night, and we climbed up to the top of Nana, and we watched this harvest moon come out of the water. It was like a prayer, you know? It was profound, it was spiritual almost. And this is what I want to do when I write. This is what I want to capture. I want to get these things on paper. I want people to smell that pluff mud. You know, everybody here knows what pluff mud smells like. What does it remind you of? What does the smell of pluff mud remind y'all of? Let me get some answers here. When you smell pluff mud, what do you think of? Anybody?
Marsh.
Marsh, okay. Specifically, what about a marsh though?
Low tide.
Low tide? Huh? Life? Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to know what fluff mud.
Oh, that's that black sticky mud that's in the marsh everywhere. If you step in it, you'll sink up to your belly button.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and your shoes will come off. It smells like oysters to me. When I smell pluff mud, I think of oysters. You know, if I go out where there's pluff mud, I want to go home and eat oysters. I got into, as I'm writing about this, I got Cumberland Island in the story. You know, I thought, how can you write a story about this area and not mention Cumberland Island? So I got a little bit in the story about the horses on Cumberland Island, the intercoastal waterway, the beauty of the intercoastal waterway, how the intercoastal, and here, you know, I think about some of Pat Conroy's descriptions about things. One of Conroy's favorite words was astonished. You can be excited or you can be astonished. I mean, and I think astonished is such a strong word. You know, when you think about the beauty of this place, it's not just exciting, it's not just pretty, damn it, it's astonishing. And the way the river flows, you know, you got, when you're writing, you want to use, and every writing teacher will tell you, first of all, you try to keep as many adverbs out as possible, but they're going to leak in here and there. You can't help that. You want to use strong nouns and strong verbs. And Southern writers like to play with the language. You know, we all do. We like to use big words, and people say, well, that looks like a thesaurus word. Well, it was. I was looking for a bear. You know, you can die or you can perish. You know, I mean, think about the Donner family, you know. They didn't die, they perished. I mean, so when the river flows to the sea. All rivers flow to the sea. That's their ultimate destination. That's where they're all going to go. Ultimately, certainly, they're going to go to the sea. But how do they flow? Inexorably. Inexorably. That word slows it all down. You know, it's this 4-syllable word. And you see the water flowing. It's just languid. It's slow moving. It's inexorable. And those are the kind of things that you want to capture. You want to try to get this stuff down as vivid as possible. And that's what I did when writing this story. I wanted Fernandina to shine. I wanted this area to be a superstar in this story. I wanted people who read this, who live here, say, that's my town. These are my people. That's the view that I look at. That's the plaza at Old Town where I go and watch the sunset. I talk about the seagulls. You ever watch seagulls flying in formation low to the water? You know how they do that? Anybody know how they do that? We got any pilots here? Huh? Ground effect, that's right. You want to tell us what ground effect is?
It's just the cushion of air that's between you and
That's right, it's like playing air hockey.
Yeah.
They come down, and when you'll see them, they start up here and they all swoop down in the line. And what they're doing when they're coming down is they're creating a buffer between them and the water that's compressed air. And all they do is they glide along on this layer of compressed air, and every now and then you'll see them do one of these and they'll go back up and they'll come down again. It's called ground effect. You can fly an airplane that way. I mean, crazy pilots do it all the time. My brother-in-law was an Air Force pilot. He never did it, but he said he saw an awful lot of pilots. He was the one who actually explained it to me. Sailboats don't get pushed along by the wind as much as they get pulled along by the wind, right, Scott? They get sort of drawn along, because you think about it. How are you going to sail along? How are you going to sail when the wind's in front of you? You got to think about that. It's lift and drag, just like an airplane. But these are all the things that I plugged into when I was writing A Mariner's Tale. Jack Merkel is the father I never had. My dad was not a good dad. I always wanted a dad like Jack Merkel. And so when I wrote this story, I just decided to make this the father I always wanted. And that's the kind of person he is. He's kind, he's understanding, he's slow to anger, he's a good teacher, he's a good mentor. The people in this story are quirky people, like we have around here. We have colorful characters in this town. We used to have a whole lot more. A lot of those have died off now. We had some really quirky characters in this town. If anybody remembers Topsy Smith down at the corner of 8th and Center down there, that guy was a quirky guy. He was eccentric, but he was part of the local color here. And so that's the thing that I did, and I hope I did a good job with in this story. Last summer, a movie producer called me who had read the story and said she wanted to take an option on it to make a movie. She's an indie movie producer. Her name is Monica Tidwell. She's very talented. She's won all kinds of awards. She even took one of her short feature films to Cannes, to the festival there. And when I noticed it in her blurbs, I said, you took a feature film to the Cannes Festival? And she goes, well, I didn't win, and I'm not, no, wait a minute. 2 teams get invited to the Super Bowl. Yes, it would be great to win the Super Bowl, but hey, you got to play in the Super Bowl. So you got to go to the Super Bowl of film festivals. Very talented, and when she asked me about this, my first question was, what's your vision for this book, for this story? Because you can't make, you're never going to have a movie that's exactly like the book. They're going to take artistic license with that book, just like I take artistic license with things when I write. I mean, if you want to end up in a novel, come talk to me. Because I guarantee you're going to say something, unless you just don't talk, or you don't have funny facial expressions or something like that, you're going to end up a character somewhere. And that's the same with all authors. That's what we draw our material from. So Monica comes along and wants to do this, and the first question I got is, what's your vision for this story? Because if it's not compatible with the story that I've done, I'm not going to let you have it. Because once I let you have it, I've got no control over it. And the last thing I want to do is see my movie, hear my novel get butchered in a movie, because then people say, God, what an awful book you wrote. No. But what she told me moved me deeply. And so she now has a screenplay written. She is now working on the budget. She's putting a shooting budget together. I had no idea how complicated it was to make a movie. I mean, I'm a little slow on the uptake sometimes, you know, and I thought, well, okay, they start at the beginning and they work their way to the end. No, that's not how it works. Indie movie producers have to get funding. You know, it's not like MGM Studios or Steven Spielberg or somebody like that who's sitting on a potload of money all the time anyway. They have to go out and find investors. They have to find people who are interested in their art. But she's got a lot of cred, you know, so she'll do it. Now, can she go all the way through and make the movie and get the movie released? I don't know. That's anybody's guess. I've got nothing to lose by it. You know, for me, it's a win-win situation, because when it happened, it ended up getting in the Florida Times Union and the Fernandina Beach News Leader, and college. I was a student at the University of North Florida, and I was on the newspaper staff at Spinnaker there, and I was one of the editors there. And the next thing I know, a young man from the Spinnaker, the editor's calling me and wanting to write a story about this alum who's got a novel out that might get made into a movie. And when I went to UNF, it was an upper level institution. Most people there were well into their 20s and 30s and up. So when this guy calls me and tells me the editor, and we get on Zoom, I'm looking at this guy and he looks like he's about 15 years old. No, what? But what happened was I got a lot of publicity out of this, and because I got a lot of publicity out of it, and once again, can Monica make a movie? I hope she can. I hope we can all go. If Monica makes a movie out of this, I'll buy us all a ticket to go see the movie. And hold me to that. I hope she can do it, but even if she can't, it got me a lot of recognition that I was getting already, but it upped the ante on it a little bit. And I made the Amazon bestseller list in January, and I was there for 3 weeks. Top 100 in Southern fiction, and I made it to number 6. So, and I was in real good company. There's some really, really good Southern authors out there. Some up and coming Southern authors that you want to keep an eye on. One's a young man named Robert Gwaltney, who wrote a novel called The Cicada Tree. I don't know if anybody's read The Cicada Tree. That's one you need to read. It's a Southern Gothic piece. It's really good. Bryn McLean wrote a book called One Good Mama Bone. Has anybody heard of One Good Mama Bone? One Good Mama Bone is about the relationship between a lady who's a mother and a mama cow. And you think, how could you make a story like that? It is a fascinating story, and the title comes from this lady who, she takes in a friend's baby who dies in childbirth, and she brings this baby in. She's single. She is just very downtrodden. She's poor. Her own mother tells her, you're never going to be a mama. You ain't got one good mama bone in your body. And she sets out to prove her mother wrong. And her mentor, as it were, is this cow named Mama Red who has a calf. And she goes to Mama Red and talks to her about child. As you're reading this story, you forget about, well, this is a cow. Personally, I love cows. I love cows. They're very gentle creatures. They're not dumb. They're very smart. But you forget that you're reading about a cow. It's like two women who have children talking to each other. So Bryn's another one to keep an eye on. She's writing a new book right now about a lady who was committed to an institution because she wouldn't give up her property or something. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the whole storyline is, but she's got a big time literary agent representing her for this one. Pat Conroy's wife, Cassandra King Conroy, wrote The Sunday Wife and The Same Sweet Girls. She is a prolific writer, and she wrote a book about hers and Pat Conroy's life together. It's called Tell Me a Story, which was another Conroyism. He said the most important words in the English language were "tell me a story," and I think that's true. I mean, we're all storytellers in some sense of the word or the other. But she wrote about their life together and some of the funny things that they did, and how he proposed to her, which is, I'm not even going to get into that. You read that book. That's one of the funniest stories I've ever read in my whole life. How that sly man proposed to this lady is just, it's just unbelievable. So that's where we are. We're moving along. I just finished the first draft of my next novel, which is called Of Locusts and Wild Honey, and it's about 5 misfit kids who throw their lot together in the summer of 1962 and take a blood oath, prick your finger with the point of the knife, and everybody share their blood together and promise, promise, promise always to be together. And what happens? John Lennon said it best: life's what happens when you're making other plans. So it doesn't quite work out that way. So it follows this group of kids for 20 years. What happens to them? It starts off with the main character, the narrator of the story, is his helicopter's crashing into the Mekong River in Vietnam where he's been shot down. And then it flashes back to his childhood and goes forward from there. But I just finished a rough draft of that, and I'm working on my revisions now, which is the hard work. I can write all day long, but doing the revisions and the cutting and the trimming and all the other stuff. Because all authors think every word they've written is just deathless prose. I mean, it's got to be there. You can't come out. This book was 165,000 words in the rough draft. It's now 99,000 words. It took a whole lot of my being brave enough to basically put the gun to my own head and having other authors that I could trust be honest with me about it. I mean, yeah, it's nice to get input from your wife and your friends and everything, but a lot of times they don't want to hurt your feelings. Now, my wife is very candid in her criticism. When I read something to her, and I read as I go along, I read her what I'm doing chapter by chapter, particularly things that have to do with women, because I like most guys, we really don't understand women, and so we got to kind of figure things out. And she's a really good resource for that. So anyway, this is my story. This is the story of a mariner's tale. This is the story of Southern writing. This is who I am. My wound is geography. It's also my refuge and my port of call. So I'm going to open it up now for comments and questions and conversation. Yes. What's your name?
Harold,
Harold.
I really appreciate your presentation this morning.
Thank you.
So you mentioned early on about a female character in the book that was not expected to be a major character, but turned out to be one. Could you expound on that?
Yeah. Like I said, she was supposed to be a passing character from one chapter to the next. Let me pause just a second. As we run up on time, if anybody needs to go, just feel free to go. If you want to stick around, I don't have anything else to do. I'll be here all night. I just do what the voices in my head tell me to do. But yeah, she was supposed to be a temporary character. She was a pass-through from one chapter to the next. But her character spoke to me. And when I say I write what the voices in my head tell me to write, shut up, I got this. I mean, they really do. If you can't hear your character talk to you, you can't write well, you can, but it comes across as flat and sterile. Margie Waller had a big voice. A big voice. She is a take charge person. She knows what she wants. and she's not going to let anybody stand in the way. She is a wealthy divorcee with a big, huge, expensive yacht who sails into this boatyard that's just loaded with testosterone and proceeds to set everybody aright. And I couldn't do without her. After she came into the story, I liked her more and more and more, and so I just kept writing about her and writing about her and writing about her. And when it got to my editor, Judy told me, I love this character, but you don't understand women. I've been married 45 years. What the hell you mean I don't understand women? She said, you don't understand women. Most male authors don't understand women. You know, she said, and I know this may sound a little sexist or something, she goes, but men and women do things different. We have different mannerisms, you know, we present ourselves differently, that kind of stuff. And she goes, I really, really like this character, but you haven't made her well-rounded enough. You haven't humanized her enough. You need to go back and do that. How do I do that? And she goes, well, I'll give you a clue. Go sit on a park bench and watch women. I can do that. I don't know how my wife will like that, but I wear sunglasses. Don't be obvious about it. And she goes, but you want to watch what's going on. You want to watch the gestures. You want to watch the woman when she's talking to her friend. You know, how she twiddles the hair behind her ear, or how she puts her fingers to her lips when she laughs. You want to see the reaction on her face when a child walks up to her. It's going to be different than a small child walking up to a guy. You're going to see a small child walking up to a woman. Things are going to be a little different, Joe. And so I went all the way back and I took Judy's advice. I followed my wife and her friends around. I followed other people's wives and their friends around. I went downtown and sat on the park benches and stared at women and closely observed. I mean, I'm going overboard here. I wasn't pervy about it or anything. I don't think. But that's what I had to do. That's Margie. That's how I arrived at her.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you for the question. Let's have somebody else here. Yes. What's your name? Prudence. Prudence. Dear Prudence.
Yes, that's exactly right. How do you come up with the characters' names? I always wondered when I'm reading a book, how do people choose the name for their characters? Because they do seem to fit once I get into it.
Lots of times you look at your character and just say, who does this person remind me of? If you really want to be just raw bones about it, you just pick up a phone director. Well, you know, what's a phone director? I confess, I keep one on my desk because if I'm having trouble naming somebody, I'll just look through the phone directory till I find a name I like. That's sort of a catch-all thing. You know, some authors have different approaches to it, and sometimes the name fits, sometimes it doesn't fit. Jack Merkel was originally Jeff Merkel, and then I realized toward the end of the story in my conversation with another author, she said, you know, you got this crusty old sailor who's running this marina. He's a retired shrimper. He's a retired merchant marine. He's this sort of hard-boiled, lonely old guy, and you call him Jeff. She goes, not that there's anything wrong with that. She goes, but how about a more masculine sounding name? Why don't you call him Jack? And I said, okay. So to answer your question, there's really no one answer for that. It's just basically whatever feels good, and sometimes you'll get it right and sometimes you won't. You're welcome. Thank you. Yes?
Your endings of stories, you always have a preconceived of how they're going to end, and does it change as you go along?
Yes. Yes to both. As I said, when I started writing this story, Jack Merkel died before the end of this story. His son, or this kid, Doug, who he took in, goes looking for this old Caribbean fisherman who gave him a St. Christopher medal, who was not St. Christopher, the patron saint of fishermen.
Stevens?
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, he went looking for this old fisherman who gave Jack this medal to take it back to him. That was the original idea of the story, and for some reason I didn't stick with that. I don't know. I don't know why I didn't, but at some point I decided that's not the direction I wanted to go with. So yeah, I mean, but I hear that from other authors all the time. I had this idea that I was going to do this, and somewhere along the way I decided, no, that's not how I wanted to do it at all. I wanted it to go this way. I think about that. A lot of people say, well, why don't you go do a, what's it called? When you write the next book about the first book, a sequel. Thank you. I had a senior moment. Why don't you do a sequel here? Has anybody here ever had a senior moment? No. I'm the only one in this room who's ever had a senior moment in the middle of a presentation. A sequel, but I don't know what I would write a sequel about. I'm not real fond of sequels anyway, because you really got to make it live up to the first one. If you don't, it's an egg. But if I were going to write a sequel, I think I would pick it up where maybe that's what this kid's doing. Maybe he's going back to find this old merchant marine who gave Jack Merkle that medal. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe that would be an offshoot of that. Maybe it would be about this kid. Maybe it would be about his sister's life, because in the story he's looking for his sister. And he keeps getting bounced around. He's in trouble. He's running from the law. He's a troubled kid. I don't know. But no, a lot of times it just doesn't end up the way you started out to be. And that's okay. Come on. I'm not letting you out of here without a question. Yes.
Does the book you're working on now have a dog in it?
Well, it's got an old blind beagle in it, but he's not a major character. And it's got an old collie in it named Rex, who Rex is a character, but he's not in the story very long. There's a dog in this one. This dog right here. There's a Great Dane in the story. His name is Poggy. Of course, everybody here knows what a pogey is. It's a stinky little fish. But there's this Great Dane in it named Poggy, and Poggy's modeled on one of my Great Danes, Harley. You know, and you know who Harley is. He wrote a story in the magazine about Harley. Anyway, Harley was the model for. But no, this book doesn't have any great dog stories. This one takes place up in South Georgia where I grew up. It's mostly built around the scenery there, but there's some animals in it. There are a lot of animals in it, but there's no main dogs in this one.
When you write a story, what's the first thing that you usually try to do? Do you try to figure out the characters, the plot? What do you try to work out first?
Well, one thing I've gotten more disciplined at is sitting down and making a list of my characters and their birthdays and their descriptions. And at first I didn't do that, and then I was realizing I was getting 15 chapters into the book, and I can't remember if this character's got blue eyes or green eyes. So I've gotten more disciplined about that, but yeah, I don't do outlines. Outlines turn into novelettes. So I don't outline. I fly by the seat of my pants. But I do take index cards and pieces of paper and stuff, and I write down, this character looks like that, this character's name. I make sure, if I'm talking about their age or something, I try to make up a date of birth for them, because later in the story, if I have to refer to their birthday or something, I want to make sure I got that right. Readers catch your mistakes now. Oh yeah, they do. They'll they'll find that error that you made in that story. So yeah, I definitely do that kind of stuff. I believe this young man had a book.
Yes, what do you do in confronting like writer's block or just waking up days and not feeling like writing?
Thank you for asking that. Any author who tells you they've never had writer's block either has never written or they're just a bloody liar, because everybody gets writer's block. The best way to combat that, and I got this from a book, Stephen King wrote this awesome little book called On Writing, The Art and Craft of Writing. And one of the things that he talks about in there is writer's block. His solution, and it works, is I'm writing, let's say I'm in chapter 4 here, and I'm in a paragraph, and my juices are flowing, and I'm blah, 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 and my wife is calling me for supper, and I'm like, just a minute, blah, 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 blah. I want to finish up. What I will do, at Stephen King's suggestion, I'll find some part in that story where my juices are just cooking, and stop. Stop. Walk away. Because what happens after you do that? Your brain continues to chew on it and turn it over and turn it over and turn it over. So when you come back to it, you're not starting cold. You're picking up where you left off instead of trying to pick up something new. And that's where you'll run into the quicksand if you're trying to do a cold start. That gets hard sometimes. I mean, sometimes I still do cold starts, and sometimes it works, but the other thing is that you can do with writer's block is go back a couple of chapters and start reading forward, because the main thing you got to do is just to get your engine revved up. Once you do that, it's gone. You know, once you get your juices flowing again. Are there times when it just doesn't come? Yeah, sometimes you just hit lulls where you just might not have anything in you for a week or so. There are a lot of authors who say, I get up in the morning at 6 o'clock and I write from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and I say, good for you. Joe Palmer is not going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to his computer and say, I'm going to write from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. No, I'm not happening, because at 8:30 the tide's changing and I'm going to be my pretty butt out there on the beach fishing. So I write when the muse seems to me the loudest, and it might be 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It might be 6 o'clock in the morning. I might get out of bed at 2 or 3 in the morning. But writer's block it's beatable. If you get too twisted around the edge, where you run into the problem with it is when you start obsessing over it and you just walk away. You find something that's good and you just walk away, and that will take care of the problem most of the time. I think you were going to ask.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would think for an author, success of having a book turned into a movie is also going to be disastrous, depending on what they do with your book and how much you're willing to let them do.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any good movies made from books that you like?
Have I seen any good movies?
Recently.
I haven't been to the movies in a while. Jared and I were talking about about a movie, an indie movie. I love indie films. There's an indie movie, it wasn't based on a book, called The Peanut Butter Falcon. Oh my God. If you've ever seen a movie, you need to go see The Peanut Butter Falcon. One of the books that I really liked that was based on a true story. It's been out for a long time now, for several years. The movie's called Lawless, and it's about moonshiners in Virginia back in Prohibition. It was made from a book called The Wettest County in the World, and it's about this particular county in Virginia. And the man who wrote it is the nephew of one of these moonshiners. And of course, he fictionalizes everything. That's one of the best, to my way of thinking anyway, that's one of the best adaptations from a book to a film I think I've ever seen. Because I saw the movie, and then at the end of the movie, or was it the beginning or the end, but based on the novel The Wettest County in the World. And I'd never heard of that book before, and I went looking for it in the bookstore, and the bookstore had never heard of it. And I ordered it and read it, and it was so true to the movie, it was amazing. It does happen, though. It does happen. The Prince of Tides. I got a good story to tell you about the Prince of Tides. Pat Conroy wrote the first screenplay. The director put it in the trash can and said, Mr. Conroy did not obviously understand the story. It's true. He obviously did not understand the story. The man who wrote the bloody story didn't understand it. Can you believe that? That's Hollywood for you. I was scared to death when Monica told me she wanted to do this. Pat Conroy's agent, Marley Rusoff, who is a dear friend of mine, helped me get this book published. She asked me if I wanted to run the long game and try to find a major publisher, or did I want to settle for and not settle, that's not even a good word, did I want to go with a small press or something? And I said, you know what? When I finished writing this, I was 64 years old, 65 years old. Let's just get it out there. I'll go with a small press. But she told me that, writing is it's getting published is not a sprint for the most part. It's a long slog. It's a really long slog. But she had some great stories about some of the stuff that Conroy turned in. She goes, everybody turns in some stuff that they think is really good, and sometimes it isn't. So, does that answer your question? I sort of talked all over the place, more or less.
I'd like to jump in just really quick
Sure,
here.
go ahead.
We can keep this conversation going in a little more of an informal manner, but I wanted to make sure everybody had a chance as well to head downstairs. There's some more food and refreshments downstairs if you'd like to see the exhibit. But of course, you can continue talking with Joe as well.
You guys. Now here's one